Right, thank you, Ansar. Yeah, let me share my screen before I continue. There we go. The title is somewhat controversial or at least thought-provoking, and I don't pretend to be a clairvoyant or psychic, but when we discussed this title in our meeting, it was initially something about the future of plant pathology. Now that's a bit of a tall order. So I thought I'd come up with something a little bit less, sort of takes a little bit of the pressure off me. And what I want to do is really look at plant pathology as it will develop in the next 50 years from literature that I've consulted. Obviously, I'm in no position to, as I said, predict the future. But I think as a background, we need to contextualize the plant pathology and look at the timeline of plant pathology. Where does it come from? If we need to know where it's going to. So we see here that in 286 BC, Theophrastus already studied diseases of trees and cereals and legumes, and he was known as the father of botany. Followed by Robert Hooke, who illustrated that a plant pathogenic fungal disease caused rose rust. Then there was the discovery by Anton van Leeuwenhoek in 1675 of the compound microscope, and so on. And we also come to the very momentous potato late blight epidemic in Ireland, which resulted in the death of more than 1 million people and 2 million people moving to basically the USA. In 1853, Anton de Barry, the father of modern mycology, established that fungi are the cause and not the result of plant disease. And if we go a little bit further to more recent times, we see that in 1903, the first academic department of plant pathology was established at the University of California under Professor Ralph Smith. This was followed by the first academic department of plant pathology at Cornell University. And shortly after that, the establishment of the American Phytopathological Society, followed by the prestigious journal Phytopathology in 1911. And exactly 100 years ago, on a local scale, Paul van der Bijl was appointed as the first professor of plant pathology and mycology in South Africa at Stellenbosch University. And only in 1962 was the SASPP founded. Exactly 50 years ago, William Schneider wrote this article in the Annual Review of Phytopathology called Plant Pathology Today. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that nothing much has changed, because he says here, quote, "Today the sciences, including plant pathology and even the universities, are in trouble." So what's new? Terms such as agriculture and plant pathology are a bit out, while ecology and environment are in. He continues to say that our discipline, more than most others, is concerned with the interrelationships of the pathogen and host, ecologically and in relation to the total environment. No other discipline is more concerned with ecology and the environment. If the public really knew about us, we should be in. Now, this is very important, because you will see that I'm going to be putting a lot of emphasis on ecology and the importance of ecology in the future of plant pathology. So if we look at some of the concepts, the old and new concepts about plant disease, we see here that the disease triangle had 3 entities: the host, pathogen, and environment, followed by the disease tetrahedron, where time came in as a factor. This developed into the disease pyramid, which brought in humans as well. Now, more recently, Bernard Slippers from FABI wrote this article in the South African Journal of Science, where he brought in a fifth dimension, society, which encompasses political and economical issues, etc., but also very importantly, symbioses, very significantly the microbiome, which, as you will see, is becoming increasingly important. So Bernard says the fifth dimension will have profound impact on disease development and outcomes on scales from the local to the global. The aim of plant pathologists in collaboration with other fields and sectors of society should be a continuously adaptive and resilient system that can buffer against shocks such as pandemics. So what are the future challenges then? Obviously, the increasing demand for food to support the booming global population is number one. Reducing production potential in agriculture because of competition for land in fertile areas and the exhaustion of marginal Arab lands. The increased risk of disease epidemics resulting from agricultural intensification, monocultures, and then ecology, deteriorating ecology of agro-ecosystems and the depletion of natural resources, and probably most importantly, the influence of climate change on the complex interactions between plants and pathogens. So Kroot, in 2003, came up with this strategy, a future strategy for plant pathology. He said it must be based on the use of one or more renewable resources, it must not break down due to evolutionary change, it must have a broad spectrum of applicability, and it must be affordable in the context of the local economy and crop value. Now, Lucas, in 2011, John Lucas, came up with three key issues that face plant pathologists in the 21st century. Firstly, as I mentioned, to strengthen food security while simultaneously safeguarding the health of associated ecosystems. Secondly, to devise pest and disease control systems that are sustainable and not compromised by the evolution of pest and pathogen strains that are able to overcome crop resistance or chemicals. And thirdly, to develop appropriate crop protection technology, as well as mechanisms for their use in low input farming systems. So Lucas outlined 5 areas where future technologies are going to develop. Firstly, disease detection and diagnosis, plant defense and immunity, accessing and exploiting genetic diversity, pathogen targets for intervention, and importantly, ecological approaches to disease control. So let's look at each one of them in turn. In terms of disease detection and diagnosis, molecular diagnostics are obviously going to play a very important role. The development of biosensors able to identify pathogen inoculum in real time, coupled to information networks, is going to provide real-time monitoring and the surveillance of crops or stored produce. And this is obviously going to give an early warning of any emerging problem or new invasive species. Nanotechnology in the past decade has grown exponentially, and nanomaterials have been integrated into disease management strategies and diagnostics and as molecular tools, and will continue obviously to do so. Nanotechnology can increase the productivity using nanopesticides and nanofertilizers, improve the quality of soil by means of nanozeolites and hydrogels, stimulate plant growth using certain nanomaterials, and provide smart monitoring via nanosensors and wireless communication devices, which obviously includes AI or artificial intelligence, something which Professor Dave Berger will tell us about more tomorrow. So in terms of disease detection and diagnosis, hyperspectral technology-based detection as a typical type of non-invasive technology is drawing increasing attention by precision agriculture. The Web of Science found that 651 relevant papers appeared from 1990 to 2019, when plant disease and hyperspectral were used as the keywords to search for in all databases. So the sensor technologies that are going to be used are going to really make a huge difference in terms of detecting and identifying host-plant interactions, ranging from color sensors all the way through to 3D sensors. And these sensors can be implemented in precision agriculture applications and plant phenotyping on different scales, from single cells all the way to entire ecosystems. The second area, which Lucas says technology is going to grow, is plant defense and immunity, induced plant resistance, and the exploitation of it by tuning or priming plant defenses to deal with a whole wide range of stresses, biotic and abiotic. Salicylic acid, jasmonic acid, and ethylene signaling pathways are potentially antagonistic. But there's the emerging view that synergy can achieve between these parts of the network and thereby achieve broad spectrum resistance to pests and pathogens. Plant defense activators. Future prospects of delivering chemicals modulating plant resistance via certain agents that are engineered microbial colonists possibly might lend themselves to low-cost seed or propagation material treatments, thereby removing the need for expensive spray regimes. So the success of these approaches is going to depend on the improved knowledge of microbial ecology. Once again, ecology emerging as a very strong theme, and population dynamics in microbiomes, as much as on the role of specific signal molecules. Sperrschneider in 2019 came up with this interesting concept of machine learning. Machine learning is the application of statistical methods to identify patterns in data, commonly divided into unsupervised and supervised approaches. When light is reflected from a healthy plant leaf, it will differ from that coming from a stressed leaf, and this can be measured using sensors. So by sequencing plant or pathogen genomes, one can pinpoint genes that are involved in host pathogen interactions. And ML can then enable the prediction of pathogen proteins that enter plant cells, the so-called cytoplasmic effectors. The third area is obviously one which is growing by the day: genetic diversification, the sequencing of genomes of the major crop species and their relatives, which is obviously going to empower plant breeders. And then genetic modification, the pyramiding of resistance genes in crops, different specificities and modes of action, reducing the risk of directional selection for virulence by pathogens. The fourth area, interestingly enough, pathogen targets for intervention. So there's a new era which beckons, where the prospect of crop pharmacology based on signal molecules and their receptors is going to become a reality. This is already being used in medical science today. It's based on the development of new chemistries that are designed to manipulate specific molecular targets, either in regulating host resistance or disabling the disease-causing processes of pathogens. And this is obviously going to be driven by an exponential increase in genomic, transcriptomic, proteomic, and metabolomic information populating databases, and improving the tools to manage, mine, and interpret this information. And then we come to ecological approaches to disease control. Obviously, by understanding the ecology of pathogens, we will improve our ability to exploit their natural enemies or antagonists. And insights into the natural diversity and activity of soil and microbial populations in microbiomes is going to provide this information on mechanisms to suppress or regulate pest species. The manipulation of microbiomes by recruiting and retaining more effective microorganisms will enable us to make more effective biocontrol agents, better biofertilizers, etc. Volatile organic compounds coming either from natural plant sources or engineered in transgenic crops are also going to be used to modify pathogen behavior. The ecological approaches to disease control obviously is going to have huge impact in terms of invasive pathogen species and the effect of climate change that will have on this. And I don't need to say much more about this. We all hear about climate change every day, but this article, Climate Change and Disease in Plant Communities, is a very thought-provoking article, and I encourage you to go and read it. The influence of climate change on rate-determining processes that are the result of the interactions between enhancing and mitigating influences on plant and pest pathogen interactions are extremely complex, as we can see here. We can only imagine, the amount of research that needs to go in to try and uncover just one of these little boxes. So it's critical to take a holistic approach to understand how and why pathogenesis occurs if we are to effectively manage for given diseases, given the synergies of these changing environmental conditions. A multi-omics approach is one that Crandall et al. Came up with in 2020. This is going to allow for a detailed picture of plant microbial interactions and will ultimately allow us to build predictive models for how plants and microbes are going to respond to stress under environmental change. Omics approaches from the genotype to the phenotype will inform plant disease ecology in this holistic manner and is going to shed light on microbial communities above and below ground. So here we see the cascade from genotype to phenotype, whereby these dynamic intraplant communication in the metabolome is going to affect microbial communities at all levels through volatile organic compounds that are released. And also then spectronomics, which are multiple bands of sensing, which are obviously also a technology that is going to grow. So what does this tell us? Left. I beg your pardon?
About 3 minutes left.
Yeah. Well, I've got 25 minutes on, so I started my stopwatch when I started talking. Okay. Towards a systems thinking approach. So phytobiomes, the term phytobiomes came in a couple of years ago, and phytobiomes consist of plants, their environment, and the associated communities. And a systems level of understanding of phytobiomes will enable us to sustainably and profitably produce sufficient crops to meet global demands while minimizing negative impacts on the environment. So how do we deal with this approaching perfect storm? Future epidemiology must bridge scales from a genetic to a global level. The catalyst for this interdisciplinary approach is going to be the application of mathematical modeling, which is going to be used to capture the complexities of these host pathogen environment interactions as we saw in the original disease triangle. So the major opportunities are going to be an unprecedented capacity to gather and analyze big data. Antimicrobial resistance is going to have the potential to cause epidemics which are not experienced since the pre-antibiotic era. And these models are going to have to merge with economic and behavioral frameworks in order to be effective. So how does this link then to educating future plant pathologists? I mean, this is a tall order. What is the future plant pathologist going to look like? And Wilkes in 2019 comes up with this term, a One Health worker, where there's the integration across human, animal, plant, and environmental health sectors. So this One Health concept then represents the collaboration of multiple disciplines working to achieve optimal health for people, animals, plant, crops, and the environment. And Mike Wingfield did allude to this a lot in his talk earlier on. So this is really where we are heading towards. interdisciplinary research. We need to understand complexity in a time of crisis. We cannot understand this complexity within a discipline, a core discipline such as plant pathology. We need to work across disciplines, between disciplines. So One Health is then, in other words, just a systems thinking approach, whereby the integration of a wide range of perspectives, including systems engineering, biogeochemistry, genomics, biochemistry, physiology, and ecology, are all going to be required components of this very complex cocktail, as you can see here, issues of plant health featuring under the human section, etc., etc. So, interestingly enough, the International Congress of Plant Pathology in 2023 has adopted One Health as a theme for all plants, crops, and trees. So it's starting to happen. So to address my original question, whether or whither plant pathology, what does the future hold for plant pathology? Well, it's definitely going to evolve as an interdisciplinary science. Future research will focus on new problems that are traditionally seen as outside the core discipline of plant pathology. Food security will obviously be dominant. The impact of climate change is going to be extremely significant. And in fact, the adaptive potential of plant and pathogen populations is going to be one of the most important predictors of the magnitude of climate change effects. So a little bit of a futuristic perspective. Collaborations with biomedical and aeronautical engineers, nanotechnologists, and computer scientists is going to help develop microsensory technology for the detection of new pathogens for use in biosecurity, diagnostics, and epidemiological modeling. Maybe one day there will be a plant disease tricorder, like the one used by Dr. McCoy in Star Trek. An instrument that contains a DNA chip from virtually every known plant pathogen, where we can simply snip off a piece of the infected plant material, slip it into the tricorder, and within seconds, we not only have a diagnosis of the disease, but all the information about its control too. Maybe a bit far-fetched, but given how technology has developed over the past few years, I'm no doubt this is possible. Thank you everyone for your attention, and apologies for the chainsaw in the background.